that's also, though, when you just talk about the sustainable forestry, one of the problems I think in the UK is that Scotland and Wales probably have more of the burden on that part, because they have a lot more uplands basically, and it's the uplands there which are being targeted for planting. And I assume that's just because the two options there are sheep or trees, and those are the two options. And for whatever reason, in Scotland and certain parts of Wales, trees have become more profitable. But the only issue there is if you go around these places, surely those people who have been farming sheep for quite some time, they don't have an income, or if they've been bought out by a larger company, they don't have an income now for 30 years or so, because apart from what they've introduced some payment for it, haven't they? I don't know what it is. Is it the carbon trading or something? There is an annual payment now for the trees there, which may be more worthwhile for them. But
you can apply for carbon credits. I think there's a number of ways of doing it. There's also an exchange where if you plant trees, then, because what happens when you change land use, say you're planting trees, the vast majority of the carbon sequestration occurs over the first 30 years of planting. And it's actually quite rapid, and then it plateaus.
that's for spruce, I assume.
Yeah, well, for all trees really, but once you change it up, they'll have a kind of carbon carrying capacity, and it might, the soils might continue to deepen over time. You might continue to sequester more carbon, but those 30 years, even for deciduous woodlands, that is actually, sorry, the 30-year time scale, and that's when most of the carbon gets captured. So if you can use these carbon capture funding streams in those first, the first few decades of that process, then that's a good way of getting onto your feet. But yeah, I appreciate that there's a difference in the type of investor that's needed, if you like, from running a small sheep farm to a commercial forestry operation. Not everyone's in the position to kind of make that change. So there's a challenge there.
Yeah, and also, what about the biodiversity of these plantations? Because I mean, I used to live in Scotland and Wales for a bit actually, and I've been around these large spruce plantations. I know there are rules on, you have to plant 5% broadleaf, 5% open land, or something like that, isn't there? And there's another category which I've forgotten. So there are certain rules on it. But I mean, if you just take 100 acres, I mean, that's already only 10 acres of non-spruce, so you've got 90 acres of block spruce, which is not very healthy for whatever heather and other plant biodiversity it might be growing in the uplands, which again, as you've said, it is quite rare in the world. In Europe, we've got most of it, haven't we, or something along the lines of most of it?
yeah there are basic requirements in terms of when planting those plantations. I think we would also like to see more deciduous trees, and we do cover this in the Alternatives to Grazing report that people can take a look at on our site. But there is some deciduous options, willow coppicing, some of these more traditional methods that might be more suitable for people with smaller areas of land, particularly if the subsidy system reflects that. So we've got this situation at the moment where you can have a small business with a sheep farm, for instance, and the subsidy might be actually, it might be more than 100% of your income. So you're kind of running without that, you're running at a massive loss. A similar system were in place for other forms of land management. So coppicing system, selling willow stakes for fencing, ramial wood chip that can be used to, in horticulture and increase the carbon content of soils, and various other things. Then actually some of these things that we see as kind of traditional and kind of heritage land management techniques actually become economically viable again. So
is there not a limited scope for that? Because I mean, surely, well, obviously it depends on which one they switch to, but the amount of sheep land in the UK, I assume, is quite big. I mean, I don't know, but given that I've lived in places like Germany before as well, where, you'd rarely ever see a sheep, over here you've got large amounts of area of sheep land, which will then be turned into, I mean, let's suggest most of it is the spruce plantations, but all those smaller people, let's say they all went into monocropping willow or hazel anyway, if they all tried to then go off and sell fencing stakes, the market would be saturated. And the danger there is if you start now, you don't get your cash flow until I don't know how long it is with willow, but let's say it's 8-10 years. At which point the price which you were expecting is now barely what it was before, because so many people have done it. Not that they would, because obviously it takes time for those people to convert. Not only that, but then you've also got, instead of grasslands which could be diverse, you've got large areas of one plant, let's say hazel or willow or whatever it might be.
Yeah, like I say, there's no one solution, and you know, it's about having a diversity of land management strategies. You know, there's and some of them will be around, will continue to be focused on producing a product, and some of them will have to move towards other social and environmental benefits. So, and I think payments for those is going to be a really important part of this process. So, you know, I would also suggest that you probably wouldn't need monocropping if you were, you know, managing in these traditional ways. You could have mixed deciduous plantations with hazel, with willow. But yeah, there's definitely challenges. It's for sure not every landowner can and every farmer can transition towards a single solution. Their soil's going to be different. Their kind of economic opportunity is going to be different. The amount of they've got to invest in changes is going to be different. So, you know, it's about having the right land use in the right place. All we can really say, and all we've done with our latest report, is to say there's a whole range of options, and depending on where you are, maybe these are going to become more viable as we go forward, and some of them already are viable.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Do you work with any like consultancy companies it's for landowners? So would you offer advice to people if they were listening and wanted to change over? Would you be able to offer any sort of services like that, sort of looking at their land and figuring out a plan? Or
that's something that we have talked about and are potentially looking to do in the future. We currently don't have that expertise in house. You know, obviously, as you suggest, that would require a specialist consultant, somebody who would the economics of land management and can kind of understand that person's business model and their land. So yeah, it would mean working with consultants. So that's something that we are exploring in the future, to see if we can offer that at least to a select few farmers who are really kind of motivated to change.
yeah, or a few case studies. Yeah, that would be. Yeah, I was just thinking that would be quite useful.